Welcome to my Assignment 2 presentation for CoDe1234. The first step was ordering the Sydney Inner West shapefile from the Maps6 government website, as well as getting the target area in OpenStreetMaps. This data was imported, the points were made into polylines, and then they were aligned. I then chose my target areas being B, H, G, and E. Then, with a mixture of baking, tweaking, and simplifying, I created the border for the site. Through using entries and guidelines, as well as parameters, I was able to generate the street layout below. To find a suitable one, what I had to do was mess around with the parameters and actually find one that was suitable for my case. The geometry was then cleaned and blocks were created based on the street network. These blocks were then used to create parcels or lots, which were controlled through the single and the multi parameters, with the difference between the single and the multi-parameter being single parameter is based only on a single parameter, and multi-parameter goes through a range, as can be seen in the image below. An attractor point and graph mapper are used to help generate a floor area ratio for each of the buildings. The length and the depth of the buildings is inputted manually, and the bottom screenshot actually shows that you're able to create a graph using this information. The Planning New South Wales government website actually ended up helping through allowing me to know what are the proper building heights, setbacks, spacings, and also a good date to actually check for the sun path. This then fits in nicely with Ladybug Sun Hour analysis, which we ended up doing it for the 21st of each month rather than just on 1 month to allow more depth in the analysis. Viewability was also taken into account through the creation of a 3D isovist, which takes into account the viewing direction as well as the viewing degrees and accuracy. What is then able to be generated is seeing what's visible and what isn't, a mapping of how visible the buildings are based on a gradient, an output of the rays, the sky visibility, and also the length of vectors, or otherwise known as how close the buildings are. A control point has been taken in the screenshot below, and it actually shows how much visibility certain objects, in this case buildings, take up in the view of all the vectors. With newly updated buildings, I ended up making another sun hours analysis, which also seemed to be very promising, since there was a high amount of yellow and orange, and very minimal amounts of blue on the map. Using a similar method to the isovist, I ended up using almost 50,000 vectors to cover the whole area to see which buildings have a good view of the harbour bridge. Using the 676 nodes on a grid underneath the area, I ended up creating that many variations. These variations were recorded, and the viewing percentages were also recorded. The highest viewing percentage for one of the variations was 73.6% of buildings being able to have a harbour bridge view. This variation was then taken forward for future use. Using a surface, a midpoint for all the entry points was able to be created. Based on this midpoint and the best point for the view, you create a line between them, and using a point on that line, you're able to actually create either the best view or the best incoming access. I ended up actually taking away from the view a little bit to go over just 70% by a bit to allow for better travel infrastructure for incoming people. A final change was made with the new layout to the sunlight analysis, where it was also improved to be between 9 AM and 3 PM rather than the whole 24 hours to improve the accuracy on the important times that we need. This time was found in the document of the page 46 of the apartment design guide. The shadows still seem promising, as they are rarely blue when they're far from the building, and they don't seem to intrude with the parkland area. Closeness centrality was also noted and was actually pretty good, with some areas not really having as high of a closeness centrality. Although some areas were with a lower closeness centrality, it can be noted that these areas were not really near too many entry points, meaning that they won't have as much road strain and don't need as much closeness centrality. Betweenness centrality was actually almost perfect, meaning that people have access to the many areas within this whole area very easily through the road. The lots were then assigned purposes and color-coded and given keys. Thank you for listening to my presentation.